Let's talk about the rhetorical situation, which is a very important part um, of the writing process. When we talk about the rhetorical situation, we are referring to the circumstances that give rise to a piece of writing. In other words, we're talking about considering what is being written, to whom, and for what purpose. By what is being written, I mean thinking about the kind of text. So if you think about the different kinds of texts that you write texts, iMessage or whatever you're using. You may post to social media. You write papers for classes. You take notes in a class. You may write emails. At some point, you'll write a resume. And understanding what kind of text we're writing helps us to understand what that text should look like. So if you wrote a research paper that looked like this, you shouldn't expect to do well on it. Or if you wrote a resume that looked like this, you shouldn't expect to do well on it. Because one of the things that we know about writing a text is that we are often very brief, not a lot of greetings, not a lot of extraneous information. We also use slang and shorthand. So if you'll notice in this one, it says, "Wanna go for a run." That's informal language that we use in casual conversation, but that kind of language is not appropriate for a research paper. And we also notice that the format, the way it looks, is going to be very different in different types of writing. So if you wrote a text to a friend that looked like this, you shouldn't expect anybody to read it, because this is what a research paper should look like roughly. It should be long and explanatory. It should be divided up into paragraphs. It should have citations. So whatever kind of text we're reading or writing, we have expectations for what that should look like. And if it doesn't look appropriate, then it can create some confusion in the reader. So one of the first things we need to do when we write is think about, what am I writing and what are the expectations for that kind of text? We also need to think about who our audience is. This is what we call audience awareness. If you think about some of the different audiences, some of the different people that you write to, friends, parents, grandparents, coaches, employers, professors, and again, even though you are writing a research paper, you'll have an audience. It may be your professor, but we need to think about audience as a little more broadly than just writing a letter to your professor. But who is that audience? Is it a general audience? When a newspaper columnist writes an article, they are writing for a general readership. And so they need to be aware of that readership. The reader may or may not be familiar with the topic, which would mean the writer needs to include some background. So thinking about who your audience is, what they know about the topic, and how much background you need to give is important. It also can affect the language that you use, how formal or informal the writing is, what is appropriate to say to that audience. And so being aware of audience is really important. So for instance, thinking about different audiences, where you could put a kissing emoji in a text to your girlfriend or boyfriend, you probably don't need to include it in a text to your coach. And while you may say, "Yo, what up," to a friend, you probably don't need to address your professor that way. You need to address your professor more formally than that. So we always need to be aware of what is appropriate for that audience. Why is the rhetorical situation important? More experienced writers consider these factors. What am I writing? What is my purpose in writing? And to whom am I writing? Inexperienced writers sometimes don't think about this, especially when they're writing something that is ungraded. For instance, emails to professors, employers. So when we write appropriately, we improve the opportunity to write successfully. We create the right interaction with the other party. Writing is communication. And to be successful as writers, we need to think about the person on the other end of that communication, the reader. If we can begin to think about the reader, then we'll write more successfully and more appropriately for that audience.